everyone, welcome back to Shutter Magazine. I'm Dustin Lucas, and today I'm going to talk to you how to simply manage your raw files in Lightroom Classic. Managing raw files, or a more fancy term that you'll hear, is digital asset management. That is what Lightroom does, right? So it allows you to bring files in, organize them, select through them, filter, call, edit. You can rename, you can reorder, you can do a lot of things with Lightroom with organization, but also editing. So I'm going to talk to you a lot about how to organize your files, because as photographers, the first thing I want to do when I get done with the shoot is sit in front of my computer and just watch the raws back up. Nobody says that, right? You just want to get the files on the computer and start editing right away. So we have to stop that, right? We all know it's bad practice to just throw the card into the computer, drop them on your desktop, and start editing away, right? So we want to make sure that we don't forget to back up. We don't get in a hurry. Everything that we shoot needs to be brought into a catalog. We're going to save that catalog on our local hard drive. We're going to work on that. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a workflow that is session specific. So when you shoot a job, you create a single catalog for that job and you edit in that catalog. We're going to call that a working catalog. Then when you're done, we're going to take that catalog and we're going to archive it. Archiving is when you're done editing and you just want to rename the files, reorder them, get them ready to send to your clients. That's what the archive catalog is for. Selection, editing, you want something that's going to be fast. You want to be in a working catalog, something that's going to be a little more lean in terms of the number of files. So let's jump into Lightroom and talk about how to get organized right from the memory cards. So the first thing we're going to need to do is create a catalog, right? So once you launch Lightroom, likely it's going to ask you to either create a new catalog or possibly open up one of your recent catalogs. But simply what you need to do is you'll name the catalog and choose where it's going to be located. That's basically it. So the most important thing is you want to save that catalog locally. You can't work off of a NAS hard drive. You can work off of a direct attached storage or DAS hard drive. I won't get into acronyms or any technical crap like that. But it's very important that you have it on your local hard drive, preferably on your desktop or on an SSD drive. It's very important. So once we get Lightroom opened up, the next thing we need to do is we need to bring files into Lightroom, right? Importing. So we can go directly from a memory card. As you'll see up here, my memory card is called Untitled. I can select it here and it's going to automatically pull up all of my latest photos on this shoot here, this little Christmas shoot with my son. What we can do here is we can go through the different panels on the right hand side. But first we want to talk a little bit about these different options at the top here. As you notice, since I'm working off a memory card, Lightroom automatically requires me to copy these files. So we can copy them to a specific destination and we can copy these raw files, or we can choose copy as a DNG. I'm not a fan of DNGs. That means that I'm going to have to work in the Adobe ecosystem no matter what I do. That is a proprietary file. You are better off keeping your files RAWs. That makes them a little more universal for the raw processing program. So just a little tip for you there when you import. So in choosing copy, we're going to go to the right side panel and we're going to drop down destination. Now, these are kind of in reverse order, but the destination is the most important feature of this because this is where your files are going to copy to. As you notice here, it automatically is pulling up my my main hard drive here that it wants to copy these files onto. Well, what I want to do is I want to be able to copy all of my raw files specifically to the backup hard drive. Now, when you're working with a backup hard drive, you might have a RAID or a Drobo system or some crazy fancy direct attached storage or even network storage that you can use as well. I highly recommend working with some sort of a RAID system so that way you can have sort of a backup of a backup, and then we'll talk about a secondary copy as well. But a RAID system allows you to have more storage. It's multiple hard drives. It tends to be either a hard drive enclosure or things like that. Not getting into storage options in this article, but something you definitely want to research and look at what the right storage option is for you to be working off of, because this is where your raw files are going to store, and this is where Lightroom is going to seek or be connected to those original files. So it's very important that you choose the right type of storage so that way you have fast connection. Likely want USB 3.0 or faster. You don't want to be working on USB 2.0 and slow hard drives. So moving upwards, we can go up into, now that we've chosen, where we want our files to go, we can choose what folders they're going to save in, right? So you can choose a specific subfolder and enter it here. Or what I like to do is I like to choose a format which fits how I label and name everything, right? So if I want to do it into a subfolder, I tend to do the year, 2018, the month, which this month, if I were to do for 12, and if I wanted to do the 25th, I could do that, and then underscore. I like to use an event abbreviation or a symbol to let me know what the wedding is. So for this, I would just say for a family session, we'll just put F, and then underscore. I could put my son's name in there just for a folder for these to go into. So that lets me know what the date of the event was, what the event type is, and then who it is, right? So another important aspect of the import module is going to be apply during import. So this becomes very important when you want to do keywording, right? So I already have a few presets here, but what you can do is you can create new presets for all of your specific information, right? So if you want some basic information to drop down, you could choose the copy name, ratings, labels, all this kind of stuff that you can have embed into your files once they come into Lightroom. This is all called metadata, right? So I can have keywords and things like that automatically brought in. So if I wanted to use one of the keywords that I use for everything, like when my wife shoots, specifically for engagements, I have all of these keywords that can be applied to every file right out the gate. So this is perfect to apply when you want this to go on every type of job. It doesn't matter what the session is. These are just the basic keywords and copyright things that you want to apply to the images as well. And you can save that as a preset here, right, to refer to in the future. What is very important here is where you can type in event-specific things, right? So if I want to put in Christmas, or I want to put in specific names to the event, or maybe a specific hat, like this is referencing Bruno Mars' album, right? So I can do all these things in keywords, and I can type all of those out, right? So I can put in Bruno Mars, I can type in Graham, I can type in Christmas, all these things that will add that are only specific to this session, but wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't save all of these into a preset because I'm not shooting this same event over and over again. Does that make sense? So that's how you can use metadata and keywords just at a small view on how to import with that data on your files automatically. Develop settings are ones if you want to apply a develop preset to your images. I don't like using this for two reasons. One, it slows down Lightroom because then it has to generate a before edited preview and the after when you're editing, as well as you can't revert back to the original unedited raw file. It always reverts back to what you import with. So I leave that at none. Moving up to file renaming, I don't do this at import. I wait for file renaming once I'm reordering the files as well as I'm archiving them because I want them to have the same file names across multiple versions, right? So I want the JPEGs to be matched, named the same as the RAWs, named the same as the RAWs on the original storage device. So all those things become important. So I don't do any file naming. I just leave them as is. I would never show the client these file names. I'll rename them for the client, but for my sake and cataloging, I leave all of those as shot. Last but not least, for file handling, which is very important for importing, right? Build previews, I always choose minimal, and I'll explain this a little bit further once we import the files and we start working. I always have build smart previews, so that way when it copies those files, it automatically builds the smart previews. Smart previews are the way to make Lightroom faster and the way you don't have to have the originals connected all the time. So if you want to jump on your laptop, edit on the couch, you have that flexibility to do that with smart previews, and you still have the majority, about 95% of the editing that you do in Lightroom is just fine to do on smart previews. That won't be an issue at all. You can choose do not import suspected duplicates. That's not a big deal. Here is where they hide the backup, right? So if I want to back up my files either onto another drive, of course, you wouldn't want it to be on the same hard drive, then that defeats the purpose. And also, RAID systems are not considered a backup, even if you have a RAID um, RAID 0, or excuse me, a RAID 1, where it's mirroring or striping the hard drive, right? Hard drive A and hard drive B are writing the same information. That's not a backup because that's one device, that's one unit. If that unit breaks, your backup hard drive's dead, right? So when you're thinking about storage and you're thinking about backup, it's important to have two versions locally or on site, and have one version off site or in the cloud, or maybe just a hard drive you take to work with you. But it's very important to have two on site, one off site. Very important here. You can create that system here. You can create two on site copies in Lightroom here. Once we're exporting files, you can export originals either to a cloud hard drive or have those synced to one of your external hard drives and running all the time. That's definitely a good idea to do. So that's everything for importing. Now that we're ready to bring our files into Lightroom, we can jump into grid mode and learn how to get organized. Now that we've imported our files, we're ready to start getting organized in grid mode. So I'm going to be talking about a few different ways that I like to organize, build folders, do some of my selection, all in grid mode, right? So getting started in grid mode, we're going to select our files, right? So what I like to do is I like to work one image at a time, and I'm just cycling through these. Well, the reason why my files are moving so fast is because I've already built standard previews. So before you get selecting, and so that way you don't have to wait for each image to load, even when we have smart previews built, it's going to require us to build standard previews. So we go up here to library in the menu bar, go to previews, and we build standard size previews. And as you're noticing, it builds these previews quite fast. And the reason why it's building them fast is because I only have smart previews linked right now in Lightroom. I don't have the originals linked. So it's building a much smaller standard preview. And what it allows me to do is I can cycle between images and it's loading for me instantly, right? So as I'm going through these, I don't have to wait for them to get sharp. I don't have to wait for them to load each one. They're just instantly popping up for me. So it's much like, almost like Photo Mechanic in the sense of how fast this is working. In my zoom in, right, I have the ability to zoom into each of these files, and it's going to fix them to 1-to-1 ratio of the smart previews, but I have the ability to do that, right? So what I like to do for selection, since that's already done, is I like to go into lights out mode. So I'll double click on a file from grid mode, double click it, then I hit the L key twice. Boom. So now I have everything blacked out and I just see my image. I like to put caps lock on. Caps lock is a nice little feature that will do auto advance. Here's why that's important, right? So when I want to start flagging or rejecting photos, I can do that and it's automatically going to skip to the next image, right? So if I click the X key, it's going to reject that file. Reject, 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 reject. And I keep clicking the X key as it adds these rejection flags. Once I get to a photo that I like this one, I'm going to choose the P key. And that's exactly what it's going to do. So it allows me to reject files and keep files, right? So I don't want to keep any of those. I'll throw those away. And I'll keep that one. I'll keep that one. Reject, 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 reject. And it's really simple, right? As I'm going through and I'm reviewing which images I want to keep, I'll keep that one, I'll keep that one. Reject, I'll keep that one. So that's as simple as it is when you're starting to select these files, right? So when you're going through, having the caps lock on can definitely help. Using lights out can help to make selection much faster. I definitely like to use those options. Now, you'll notice that I already have, majority of my images 5-starred and selected. So what I would like to do now is looking through and filtering out all the unflagged images. I'm going to go ahead and undo all those flags that I applied, just to kind of show you real quick how I do this. So now that I have all of the unflagged images, let's go to 5 stars and flag them real quick. P key. And all the unflagged images. choose X's. So you can see all the rejects and all of our selected images here as well. So that's a nice view for both to see everything, or if you just want to see the selected files, that's fine as well. So now we can go through and start adding folders. And so in grid mode is where I like to start to create subfolders. And the reason why I do this is because it makes everything much more organized in Lightroom. Because if you do something outside of Lightroom, Lightroom doesn't have it logged in its folders menu here. So what's really important as you put all your originals in one spot and then you move selections around, I like to create subfolders. So when I click on the parent folder here, which is the name that we created when we put these files in the destination folder, you can click on the plus sign and create add subfolder. So you can choose an option to include selected photos or not. But if I wanted to create a 06 underscore, let's say I wanted to create black and white. Black and white folder, right? So I can select all of these, create a virtual copy of all of these files, turn them into black and white with the V key, and I should be able to put these into another collection because it is a virtual copy, it's not an actual file. So if I try and drag these into black and white, it's not going to let me move virtual copies, right? So this would make a little more sense for a collection, if I wanted to do. There's multiple ways, right, to I'll go ahead and add those black and whites there. So with the original files, what I had already done is when I filtered to my, let's go ahead and filter out my virtual copies, right? So now we have just the 104 color images. What I can do is move these and put them into different folders, right? So what I had done originally is everything lived in the originals folder here. And then when I selected these files, I brought them in and put them into the selects folder. So that way in the future, if I want to delete all of the originals that I didn't select, I can do that. And it makes it super fast for me to do that. So for the 209 files that are in here, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all the virtual copies. Right, so there's 104 selected files in this folder. So in selecting those, as I add these other subfolders, that's what I like to do, and so that way you're seeing it happen in real time in the specifically, let's see here, in Finder as well. So I have all of those listed here, right? So it's very important as you build them in Lightroom, they'll automatically show up in Finder. It's better to do them here than to do them in Finder separately. So when I'm moving files around, another thing I'd like to do is to do a custom order. But in order to do that, I can't just select, if I hit the T key, custom order is already selected because I've done this in the past. But typically, I wouldn't be able to do a custom order. It wouldn't have this as an option, right? So because I've moved the files around and done that, what you typically need to do is select all the files and put them into a collection. So if let's go ahead and delete this collection. In order to actually move files around, because usually it doesn't let you do that, but it is since I've done it previously. But if you don't have this option in Lightroom, not to worry. You just have to select all the files, create a new collection, and I'll call it rename. As you saw I had before, we'll choose include selected files, so it'll include the 104 we had. And now if you wanted to take some files, like for instance if you wanted the end of the session or some files from the end of the day, Let's see here. What files would I want to move around? Well, if I wanted to move the black and white images to the front, we can do that. Select them all, drag them all the way up here to the front. And now all the black and white images could be at the front. You might want to do this with detail shots, or when you're shooting the bride alone, groom alone, you might be shooting at the same time with two different teams, but you can reorder these files so that way all the bride images are together, so it's not bride, groom, but all the bride images are together, then the groom, then the details, right? You can sort of set that up much nicer versus just doing it by capture time. If you have multiple people shooting, you have that problem. So that gives you kind of a quick option here to do for custom order, and then you can move the files around. The next thing we want to do is show the power of smart previews and how fast that works for you in develop mode. All right, now that we're ready to start editing in the develop panel, it's very important that we have smart previews, right? So as you notice here, I'm working from smart previews. I don't have the originals. I can't zoom in all the way to these files. You see how it gets pixelated. So I don't have one-to-one previews, but my smart previews are pretty good for about 95% of the stuff that I'm going to do in here. So it's very important that you're starting with smart previews, that you want to have those standard previews built that we talked about in grid mode, library previews, standard previews. That makes things much faster. Typically, you'd have those built once we were doing the selection process, right? So the next step is going to make sure that even if we updated our Lightroom or we've been using Lightroom for a while, we want to make sure our settings are always set the same, right? I always make sure that use smart previews instead of originals are here. This won't matter as we have smart previews only, but this is really important if you don't want to unlink your original files and keep them connected so it still runs fast. It's also very important to have your maximum cache size to 100 gigs. I turn off the graphics processor. That never helps me. All these kind of things, very important for your preferences. So what I like to do is start with either a preset or sometimes just kind of testing the waters with how good Lightroom is with its auto settings. I kind of start from there, and I kind of like the way that it, kind of evens out everything in this image. It brings details in and things like that. I think it's a little too much here for my taste, but this is kind of a good starting point where I want to take this image and just kind of push it a little bit further. So something that I like to do whenever I'm working in Lightroom, and especially working from a preset, is I'm going to have specific things going on in the background that I absolutely hate. So toning back some of that green and orange that's in this image is something that I want to do immediately. So when I go from here and just kind of toggling some of that, um, some of those issues going on here, is I'll start to adjust specific settings, and I'll use target adjustment tools, right? If I want to bring down even more of the greens. Now I don't want to make them look unrealistic, but it's just kind of nice to take it from this kind of nasty green yellow setting to something a little more subtle with that saturation, and that's something that I kind of dial back as well. And once I do that, I find that I'm ready for the next steps, right? I want to make sure my color profile is good. I'm going to apply that, so that kind of tweaks some of those colors as well. And I'll do the rest of my editing and get it ready for export, right? So, I tweaked it a lot further from, the auto settings, but I thought that gave it, a little more of a kind of a dull look, and I don't mind the way that looks, right? So I'm going through and adjusting, and what I like to do when I adjust my first image, of course, is I'll sync it to the rest of them, my HSL settings that I'm working with, or in that specific scene, right? So I want to make sure that if all of these green tree images need to have that same kind of look in the background, I want to make sure to sync that to all of those. But it doesn't necessarily need to be sung to every image, but I can select those and sync those specific settings. So it might be something that I want to do contrast, highlight, shadows, all of these kind of typical settings here that I want to apply. Color adjustments is HSL, so that's very important to keep. And those are all the adjustments that I want to, go. I don't want to do exposure or anything like that. So if I were syncing these, I would make sure to use the camera serial number. This is very helpful when you're using multiple cameras because this is actual cameras. Unless you're working with Sony, then you don't have this option. Um, but I think the newest update of Lightroom lets you split Sony cameras up as well. But this allows you to sync specific images in a set. And then you can also do match color adjustments. So that way all these can kind of be matched up a little bit better. I mean, we're going to have some tweaks here and there. That kind of got warmer. We make some adjustments. So those are some things that you can do to make develop module a little bit faster, especially with reorganizing your files. You want to make sure as you're doing it by serial number and custom order that you keep all of those files together. A lot of photographers like to split up parts of the day, like getting ready, details, first look, all that kind of stuff, which can kind of help here in organization, but I think that's a little overkill. Not something we need to do for an engagement session. It's a single camera and all that kind of stuff. So that keeps it pretty simple. We already did the virtual copies and turning images into black and white. Of course, if we wanted to create virtual copies of these and bring them back into color, we could do that as well. If we went the black and white route, excuse me. But virtual copies can be a very powerful tool to organize and create versions. That's a better way to think about it. Digital versions of your files to do some different creative editing and things like that. But those are some quick things that I like to use with the smart previews. The power of smart previews and develop module makes things much faster. Now that we're done editing our session, all of our images are edited to the look that we want, and they're all relatively consistent. We are ready to archive this catalog into the master. And so that's our final step before we rename files and do all that kind of stuff. Now that we're done editing our files, we're ready to archive our session into our master catalog. So it's likely the first time you open up Lightroom that your catalog saved in pictures, or maybe the first catalog you created that you just imported everything into. That's perfectly fine if you have that already, or if you want to create a new master catalog that you everything you shoot into the future or for 2019. That all can live in this catalog. That's definitely a good way to work. So remember, we imported into a specific catalog that I call more session or event specific. That's what you're going to work in. That's what you're going to edit in and spend all your time tweaking the images. And once you're done, we need to bring them back into this master catalog. So this has like a bunch of different sessions and different edits and things like that that I've shot or that I've edited and gone through this year. So all you need to do to bring a catalog or archive a catalog into Lightroom is this process that's called importing from another catalog. And the easiest way to do it is to find the catalog file from this session. Remember, we named it the month, day, and year, which I think I did year, month, day, month before. It doesn't matter. For this specific session, we want to bring the Ryan and Sonley catalog into our master. And you literally just click on it, drag and drop it into grid mode. And it's automatically going to pop up the import from catalog dialog box. So what you're going to notice is it's going to choose all of the subfolders that already exist in here. It's going to ask file handling, all that kind of stuff. So since we don't have other things in our other subfolders, they're not going to show up specifically in Lightroom, which is okay. It's not importing, but it's going to only bring in the files that are active in the catalog. So it's going to show all new files. Nothing's going to happen here. We're going to go ahead and import, and you're going to have this same option every time because you didn't import these files. You're not going to import the files into two catalogs. You're just going to import them into the session or the event specific catalog, edit there, and then you're going to import that catalog into your master catalog. So everything can exist here. It's a much faster way. How fast that was with all these files are now all populated into Lightroom. It would never be that fast for importing, even if you were adding the files. So it's very important that you copy, import in that original file, and you just drag and drop them into here, and everything that we need will be here as well. So now we can go in and we can start to rename our files and things like that. If we just want to look at the originals, we can. We can select all, and we can do things like file renaming, which you can do here in the metadata tab. So if you click on file rename, what I like to do is I already have a preset set up where it's client name. But if I go down here to edit, I can change who that client is. So if I have a different setup that I want to do, I can change the date, 2018, 12/26, family, and change this name as well. And so that's going to allow me to do whatever I want to do with this client name. It's going to call edited each time. There's also other pre-built presets as well, and then I like to do three numbers, or a sequence of 3 images here, or 3 digits, excuse me, for engagement sessions. For weddings, I might do 4 or more, just depending on how many images I have. But you can add different things here as well into your file names. But once we hit, and this will give you a sample of what it's going to look like, once we hit done and click OK, it's not going to let me write these files since I don't have my originals, right? So what you would want to do is, of course, match up the RAWs, so it will rename those RAW files. And I don't think I have any of them connected here on this machine, but let me check to make sure. I do have all the selected files that are here, which have already been renamed. So we should be able to do since those are already renamed. So I had done this previously already, and as you can see, it has all of the file names here along with the XMP, so it renames the original files as well, which is, I keep those separate from the selects, so that way we only have one version of these files, but we can revert them back if we need to. If we need to revert those files back, you can always go back to edit. You can clear everything out, and you can have it do original file name, right? So it'll put your original file name back in as long as you're working in the same catalog. That's actually a nice trick when you need to add files in, then rename them or revert them back to what they originally called. You have the access to do that. So whenever you're renaming the files, it's important that you do that in your archive or master catalog versus doing it in the session one, so you can revert back to it in the future. But that's everything for archiving your catalog. Now we can look at the final results. Now that we've gone through a simple way to go from ingesting your files to archiving your catalog, now you have a simple start on how to manage your raw files. So definitely the most important thing is to remember this is a start. You want to tweak it to conform to your shooting and backup and editing style and schedule. But storage options are something you definitely want to think about. Remember, RAID is not considered a backup. I don't care what you read online. It's not a backup. It's just a single storage solution. So if you have a Drobo device that you spent thousands of dollars on, or a multi-bay system that you're backing, quote unquote, backing files up, that's not really a backup. That whole unit could break, overheat, explode, and you lose all of your files. So, right, nothing's backed up. So you have to think about it as a 2 on-site, 1 off-site. It's very important to have. And you shouldn't have to back up every single file you shoot. What I typically do is back up on-site everything that I have for a temporary amount of time, and then all my selected files, I will load those to cloud storage, so that so that you can have an offsite storage, but you're not saving hundreds, tens of thousands of raw files in cloud storage either. That just doesn't make sense. But make sure that you're working with Lightroom. Lightroom will need a backup when you're saving that as well. So when you close out of the catalog, there's a backup for Lightroom it's going to ask every time, which becomes very important. There's backups and versions of catalogs and things like that everywhere. I like to keep all of the Lightroom catalogs saved on a local hard drive so they're fast. But remember, whatever you choose to do, keep it simple, repeat it, but also make sure that you're consistent with managing your files. It's the most important thing, is just find something that's simple, be consistent, follow that over and over again. And if you run into a wall or run into issues, you reevaluate your file management system and you adjust from there. And that's all I have for you guys.